Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast, and if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you.
The St. Kitts. Uprising they don't teach in school. History is written by the victors. We've all heard it, but what does it really mean? It means for every story of colonial glory that makes it into a textbook, there are 1,000 others that get silenced. Stories of defiance, stories of unbelievable courage, stories of people who refuse to be broken. The standard history of slavery is often a story of passive suffering, with a few big, famous revolts thrown in. But that's not the whole picture, not even close. It ignores the constant burning fire of resistance that was the reality for so many enslaved people. What if I told you that in 1639, on the tiny island of St. Kitts, a group of enslaved Africans did the impossible? They didn't just escape. They fled to a mountain, built a fortress, and basically declared war on the entire colonial system. While concrete historical records are scarce, the powerful legend of this uprising has been passed down for centuries. This is the story of their fight for freedom, a story that has been almost completely erased from the history books. This is the legend of the runaways of Mount Misery. To get why they ran, you have to understand the hell they were running from. By the 1630s, St. Kitts was one of the first places the English and French got a foothold in the Caribbean. The island, just 68 square miles, was being turned into a giant sugar factory. And that factory ran on one thing: the brutal, back-breaking labor of enslaved Africans. Life on a sugar plantation was a nightmare. The work never stopped, and the conditions were less than human. Between the blistering heat of the cane fields and the terrifying dangers of the boiling houses, death was always around the corner. Malnutrition, exhaustion, and the constant threat of the whip were just a part of daily life. People weren't seen as people. They were property, tools to make money for Europeans an ocean away. But something else was bubbling under the surface. The constant importation of Africans meant that many people arriving on the island had living memories of freedom. They brought with them their skills, their traditions, and a fierce determination to get their liberty back. You take these proud, unbroken spirits and force them into the most degrading system imaginable, and you've got a recipe for an explosion. St. Kitts wasn't just a plantation, it was a powder keg. The story goes that in November of 1639, that powder keg finally blew. In the French-controlled Capesterre region, a group of over 60 enslaved Africans had reached their breaking point. Pushed too far by the cruelty of their owners, they made a collective decision to fight back in the most direct way they could. This wasn't just a few people sneaking off into the night. This was an organized flight of more than 60 men, women, and children, leaving together to build a new, free life. Can you imagine the courage that took to gather your family, look your kids in the eye, and walk away from the only world you know, a world of pure horror, and into the complete unknown? They left the sugarcane, the whips, and the branding irons behind, and headed for the rugged, imposing mountain known as Mount Misery. They were risking a gruesome, immediate death for just a sliver of a chance at freedom. Their act was a powerful statement. It's better to die on your feet in the mountains than live on your knees on the plantation. Their destination, Mount Misery, is a huge volcanic peak that dominates the island. Its steep, jungle-covered slopes were a natural defense. And there, according to legend, this community of runaways, known as Maroons, did something amazing. They built a fortified camp, a literal fortress of freedom. The location was brilliant. One side was protected by a sheer cliff, impossible to attack. The only way in was through a single, narrow path that they could easily defend. This wasn't just a hideout. It was the capital of a new free society. But they weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. From their mountain stronghold, they started launching raids on the plantations below. These were tactical strikes, aimed right at the heart of the colonists' wealth. They disrupted the sugar economy and liberated supplies for their own community. For a short, brilliant moment, a new power existed on St. Kitts, a power built on African resilience and an unstoppable desire for freedom, looking down on the system that had tried to crush them. The idea of an armed, fortified community of Africans raiding plantations sent a wave of absolute terror through the colonial government. This wasn't just a nuisance. It was a symbol of rebellion that could inspire thousands more to rise up. The French governor, Philippe de Longuevilliers de Poissy, who had just arrived on the island that year, knew he had to crush this uprising, and he had to do it fast. Governor de Poissy was a man who understood power. He was a nobleman and a high-ranking Knight of Malta, with big plans for the island's sugar economy. A thriving community of African freedom fighters waging a guerrilla war was a direct threat to everything he was building. He couldn't let it stand. So, de Poissy gathered a force of 500 armed men. This wasn't some ragtag militia. It was a unit of trained soldiers with one mission: march up Mount Misery and wipe that fortress off the map. The message had to be sent, and it had to be brutal. There was no place for a free African state on St. Kitts. As the soldiers began their climb, the fate of the 60 or so people in the mountain stronghold hung in the balance. The battle, if you can call it that, was tragically quick. The runaways, for all their bravery, were poorly armed and hopelessly outnumbered by a professional fighting force. The soldiers stormed the narrow pass and overwhelmed the defenders with relative ease. What came next wasn't justice. It was a calculated campaign of terror. Many of the rebels were killed as the soldiers overran their camp. Those who were captured faced a fate meant to be a horrific lesson. Some were burned alive. Others were quartered, their limbs put on stakes, and displayed publicly for every other enslaved person to see. The message was clear. This is the price of resistance. Their fortress of hope on Mount Misery was destroyed, its people slaughtered, and their dream of a new life extinguished by colonial violence. But the story doesn't quite end there. In the chaos of the attack, one of the rebel leaders, described as a gigantic man, managed to escape. As his community was annihilated, he slipped back into the dense forests of Mount Misery, refusing to surrender. The stories of heroes like this leader are the ones that get lost to time. Here on this channel, we believe these are the histories that matter most. If you agree, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It's a small click that helps us keep bringing these forgotten stories of resistance to light. For the next 3 years, this lone survivor is said to have waged a one-man war against the authorities. From the safety of the forests, he became a ghost in the mountains, a symbol of defiance who was kept informed by a network of other enslaved workers. His knack for evading capture led to rumors that he was protected by magic, that bullets couldn't touch him. De Poissy, furious that this living legend was still out there, sent a special squad of soldiers to hunt him down. They found him, surrounded him, and fired, but their muskets misfired. The enraged leader charged them, and they fled in terror. A second squad was sent. This time, after another volley of failed shots, a sergeant reportedly held his nerve and shot the leader, ending his long fight. Though the 1639 uprising was crushed, the spirit of resistance on St. Kitts never died. It just went underground. Nearly 200 years later, in 1834, that spirit erupted again. When the British Empire abolished slavery, they replaced it with an apprenticeship system, forcing the supposedly freed to keep working for their old masters without pay. On St. Kitts, this was rightly seen as slavery with a new name, and it sparked immediate resistance. On July 31st, 1834, the night before apprenticeship was set to begin, workers on a dozen plantations laid down their tools and walked into the mountains, refusing to work as unpaid apprentices. During this general strike, another legendary figure emerged. a man named Marcus of the Woods. Marcus was a long-term runaway who had been living in the mountains since at least 1813. By 1834, he was a leader of runaways, and the authorities were terrified he would organize the striking workers into a new Maroon army. Though a massive manhunt was launched, there's no record that Marcus of the Woods was ever captured again. From the legendary fortress on Mount Misery in 1639 to the general strike of 1834, the history of St. Kitts is a history of non-stop struggle for freedom. These aren't just footnotes. They are central to the story of the Caribbean. They tell a story not of victims, but of fighters who never, ever stopped resisting their bondage. These events aren't taught in most schools because they mess up the simple, clean version of history we're often fed. They complicate the narrative of happy colonies and kind masters. They prove that enslaved people weren't just waiting around to be freed. They were actively fighting to free themselves. In 1983, when St. Kitts and Nevis finally gained its independence, one of the new nation's first acts was to officially rename Mount Misery. Today, it's known as Mount Liamuiga, its indigenous Kalinago name, which means the fertile land. The name Misery has been cast aside, but the memory of the defiant men and women who fought on its slopes should never be. Their fortress may have fallen, but their legacy of resistance is timeless. Thanks for joining us on this journey into a history they don't teach in school. If you found this story powerful, do us a favor and hit the like button and share it. And for more hidden histories and incredible stories of resistance, make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, remember that history is full of heroes whose names we were never meant to know. It's our job to go find them.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you.